Good afternoon to our friends in the United States and good evening to those listening from the UAE. I'm Dana Al-Marashi, Head of Cultural Diplomacy, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to our special panel discussion featuring key institutional players in the art scene, both in the US and the UAE. Today, we are especially honored to have with us leadership from Christie's, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Grey Art Gallery at New York University, and Art Jameel. As you will hear from our distinguished speakers, the United Arab Emirates has and is leading the way as the region's cultural hub, a country where people from over 200 nationalities call home motivates us to create inclusive and open, a country where people from over 200 nationalities call home motivates us to be creative, inclusive, and open to inspiration. Craftsmanship, design, and art is embedded and deep in our culture. So naturally, our appreciation for talent and beauty in all forms is ingrained in our heritage. It would be unnatural for the UAE's rapid rise from humble beginnings to the ultra-modern country it is today without incorporating its patrons, world-class galleries, auction houses, and museums to share masterpieces, religious artifacts, historic sculptures, modern and contemporary works of art from every part of the world. Our panel today will explore how the relationship between the United States and the United Arab Emirates-based institutions have shaped the regional art scene in the last decade. Hala, Khayat, and Antonia Carver have been instrumental players in helping to shape the arts and culture scene in the United Arab Emirates across commercial and creative programming, and I am excited that they will be able to share their stories with us today. In one of the many roles as director of Grey Art Gallery NYU, Lynn Gumpert has just welcomed Virgil Art Foundation's collection from one of our most notable art collectors and art enthusiasts, Sheikh Sultan Sarud Al-Qasimi. Finally, Clare Davies at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York is working on curating regional exhibitions and building the museum's collection of Middle Eastern modern and contemporary artworks, and also partnering closely with Art Jameel on an endowment to support the acquisitions from the region. Moderated by Suzy Sikorski, founder of Mideast Art, a digital art platform that is focused on documenting the local art history and contemporary scene of the UAE and the wider region, I wanted to personally thank her for partnering with us on a series of digital programming that gives our audiences in the United States a deeper understanding of the US-UAE cultural relationship. Our hope is to increase partnership, opportunities, and exhibitions between the two countries, and conversations like this is what makes it possible. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Dana, and to the UAE Embassy for this opportunity to partner with you during these challenging times. I want to also thank each of the panelists for sharing their stories in this timely discussion. Despite these social distancing days, I've actually felt closer than ever to the art community locally and across borders. This panel topic is on building bridges between the UAE and US. Each of the panelists will identify with their own unique bridge between the two worlds. From our conversations today, we will get to understand that these bridges have already been built, and we are now focusing on strengthening them through such important programming and initiatives. This strong panel of women are all each trailblazers in their own right, coming from such unique and diverse backgrounds to their current roles. Each of these panelists knows each other and actually has worked alongside one another in some form, whether in person or through certain masterpiece artworks and collections that made its way to them. This comments on the collaborative nature of the art ecosystem we have found ourselves in. I wanted to briefly introduce the panelists. I chose each of you not only for the institutions you represent, but of your own journeys getting to where you are today as ambassadors of culture. Our guests from the US, Lynn Gumpert, Director of Grey Art Gallery in NYU, Clare Davies, Assistant Curator of Modern Contemporary Art of the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Both work tirelessly on exhibitions, artwork acquisitions, and publications that focus on art from the region. In the UAE, we have Antonia Carver, Director of Art Jameel, Hala Khayat, Director and Head of Sale at Christie's in Dubai. Both Antonia and Hala have been instrumental in shaping the art scene in the many hats they have and continue to wear as art educators, writers, and directors of key institutions. They have made the UAE a special home for them for so many years, just like myself. And to my audience, my name is Suzy Sikorski. My wings spread between Dubai and New York. I'm that American girl who decided to pick up and carve out my life in Dubai, who identifies as a cultural storyteller of the art scene. My seeds in the UAE were planted actually during my time in New York, visiting Middle Eastern exhibitions at galleries and museums, following the auctions and fairs in Dubai online, and reading publications from the region I managed to get a hold of. My early perceptions of the UAE were actually shaped through arts and culture from the beginning, from the artists and artworks that made its way to New York, a much different exposure than so many from the US. Spreading culture is a pillar at the UAE Embassy in Washington. Its cultural diplomacy department is one of the only of its kind in the UAE embassies around the world under the vision of Ambassador Al-Otaiba. Storytelling is what encapsulates Mideast Art, the digital art platform that I run as I share stories from the region from a unique perspective. I focus tirelessly on documenting the UAE art scene that started when I studied abroad at the American University of Sharjah and ultimately during my Fulbright scholarship in 2016, just after my undergraduate years. My footprint spans the entirety of the UAE, trekking to artist studios and archiving untold and forgotten stories from the earlier days, all from a country that was formed in 1971. But just as many current initiatives here are trying to uncover the development and growth of the UAE from the 1970s and 80s, it's also important to understand the rapid changes of the past 10 to 15 years that many times are overlooked today. The arts and cultural scene did not happen overnight in the UAE. Organizations, academic institutions, art fair programs, a gallery district, and grassroots artist collectives have been key to making this a vibrant place that has become a unique hub to the regional Middle Eastern art scene built by a diverse network of people. Today, I find myself within this current, especially in my present work as a specialist at Christie's auction house in Dubai. Since then, we look back at milestone moments, the many Sharjah Biennales, the opening of the Louvre Abu Dhabi, the NYU Abu Dhabi campus, Art Jameel, the renovation of the Abu Dhabi Cultural Foundation, the first auctions and art nights, Hala Avenue. The list is endless, and each institution important in its own right. To those watching from the UAE and US, to art practitioners, art lovers, and students who have either found themselves in the UAE at one point or continue to work here or who have not yet made the trip, this is a chance to hear their panelists' insights of the tireless work put into building the art scene with outreach that continues to grow from local to international. Hearing their stories gives us an incentive to be a part of this current, to mark our calendars, to check out these latest exhibitions or online virtual viewing rooms, to buy the publications and review the auction catalogs that are readily accessible. As said by the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, founder of the UAE, he who does not know his past cannot make sense of his present and future. He who does not know his past cannot make the best of his present and future, for it is from the past that we learn. We are but one part in the larger whole of a self-sustaining art ecosystem run by pure passion for the arts and the heritage and culture of this region. So with that being said, let's take a trip down memory lane these past few years. Ladies, please briefly share with us some insight into your earliest inspiration of the Middle East and UAE, your organization and your current work, and then we'll roll into the Q&A. Hala, I'll start with you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our panel. I see the numbers are growing. Thank you so much, Dana, Haytham, and the team at the Cultural Department at the UAE Embassy in Washington, D.C. for organizing this. And thank you so much, Suzy, my enthusiastic young colleague, for your true respect, appreciation, urge to understand, to document, and preserve the UAE and regional cultural scene through your ever-growing platform at Mideast Art. I'm so proud of you. You may be American at heart, but you're a truly Orientalist in spirit. Today's subject, building cultural bridges, is an essential one in a time when so many of our pre-existing bridges on many levels, layers, are sadly being demolished. My humble journey started in Damascus, Syria, where I lived for the first 20 years of my life. My early perceptions of the UAE and the USA came in beautifully packaged stamps. which I collected when I was a very little girl. I collected them meticulously. I had stamps from Sharjah and Al Qawain, illustrating sunny desert scenes and palm trees, alongside some Arabian motifs with falconry and camels. We didn't have Google Images back then. At the same time, I was also collecting American stamps coming to us on letters from my extended family in the US, which featured tall buildings, skyscrapers, computers, numbers, and spaceships. Both destinations made me dream as lands of rich visual opportunities. I had the lucky chance of visiting both when I was very young. So I had an image of that dream. From there, I grew to collect books, newspaper articles, snippets about anything art I was able to find. But anything was done by Middle Eastern art, and especially Syrian artists, was very important to my collection. This eventually led me to study visual communications at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Damascus, where I was taught by Fateh Mudarris in his final year and Elias Zayat, among many other amazing Syrian artists, and I salute them all. This was followed by my master's degree at Central St. Martin's in London, School of Art in London, which I came to know much later on that the leading Emirati artist Hassan Sharif studied there in the early 1980s. It was called Bayam Show School of Art back then. Little did I know that then the fate would bring me to Dubai in the early 2000s, which has been my home since. The United Arab Emirates was and still is a safe destination for people from the Levant, the Near East, and from all over the world. Dana just mentioned 200 nationalities living side by side in a peaceful harmony in Dubai. The UAE allowed them to establish independent businesses, to develop as entrepreneurs, or to get employed by the local international corporations, all the while contributing to the economical growth of their home countries. Likewise, the USA has been a constant ideal for immigrants from around the globe since the late 19th century until today. What these two countries have in common is their ability to allow the flourishing of businesses and individuals from all around the globe in a safe atmosphere celebrating freedom. When Christie's decided to operate in this region in the mid-2000s, they chose to settle in the United Arab Emirates because of the transparent nature of conducting business, with internationally compliant business practices similar to Europe, North America, and the Far East. The opening of this office was pivotal in the ecosystem of the Middle Eastern art scene, and it's safe to say it changed it forever. For the first time, the art from this region was celebrated on an international platform, led by the leader in art business. Was there any art in the US before that? Yes, there was, and there were so many little exhibitions here and there. There were so many artists that settled in the USA, but you know, like the establishing of this whole ecosystem in the UAE in 2006, it was a major, major point for all of the Arab countries. The art I had previously seen in small ateliers, whether in Beirut, Damascus, Amman, Alexandria, was now being printed in our beautifully glossy catalogs and now online, distributed globally to the top collectors, top institution, with essays written in English, providing for the first time sometimes information that was until then available only in Arabic. And as you know, this library behind you that you point out, Suzy, was not there in 2005, 2006. So Christie's presence and work in the Middle East, our department, allow for the building of this bridge between East and West, with the movement of these artworks that belonged once to the East, that traveled all the way to the West, and we managed to bring it back. So I think that's my little story.
Thank you, Hala. I'm really excited maybe to ask further about some special artworks later down in the Q&A. So let's hop over to New York. Lynn, maybe you want to introduce yourself and your inspirations to the Middle East.
Sure. Thank you for including me, and thanks to all my fellow panelists and to everyone who's organized this. I think I'm the odd woman out on this panel, having based on my studies previously to coming to the Gray Art Gallery in 1997 in European modernism, although I had always been interested in other modernisms. But it was when I first came to the Gray in 1997 and discovered that we had the amazing collection of Abby Weed Gray, who set out to collect contemporary non-Western art in 1960, and then founded the Gray Art Gallery, that I was introduced to works from Iran, Turkey, and India, among other countries. Those are the countries she collected the most. I had previously done a lot of work in Japan and had been very interested in the modernism of that country. My first real introduction to the UAE, I think, came in the form of a flux email about the Sharjah Biennial. And I very much remember getting this and thinking, where's Sharjah? And what is this biennial that I haven't heard about? And then I was very fortunate to be able to go to the UAE in 2009. And I think, Clare, you were on that trip as well. It was an initial trip, and the occasion was the fact that NYU is building a campus in Abu Dhabi. And we were brought over, a cohort of faculty and students, to take a look at the situation and make recommendations for programming, etc. And at that point, it was also very good timing in terms of it being March. So we were able to visit Art Dubai and the Sharjah Biennial, and it was very impressive. And so I've had the opportunity to go back several times, and most recently, Suzy, as you mentioned, we're so pleased to have taking shape a selection of abstract works from the Barjeel Art Foundation that was co-curated by Suhaila Takesh and myself. And I must give, again, more credit to Suhaila. I was the student on this one. She was the leader. But what was nice was I brought fresh eyes. And so we had a wonderful dialogue about, which works we could choose, and looking at abstraction in the Arab world.
Which I think is behind you.
Yes, so I'm seated virtually in the gallery. The works, we had to close, unfortunately, early due to the pandemic. But I'm virtually in the gallery with some of the prints by Kamal Boulata behind me.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. Let's get over to Antonia. I feel we have parallel backgrounds right now, and I'm curious to probably hear some stories about all of these books that's behind you, and your story of being in Dubai. So share with us your story a bit and what you do, especially at Art Jameel.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here with such close colleagues. And, thank you to Dana and Haytham and everybody at the embassy for inviting us. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty similar to Hala. I moved to the UAE in 2001. At that time, I was working for film festivals and looking at Iranian and Arab world films for film festivals in the UK. And I also I'd been writing for the art newspaper a little bit, and I went to them and said I thought they should have a Middle East correspondent. At that time they said, yeah, sure, but we'll pay you by the word and you'll be really, really poor, that that you won't have anything to write about. And then very quickly, obviously, things started to change. Yeah, similar to Lynn, I mean, the kind of revamp of the Sharjah Biennial that Sheikh Al-Qasimi did in 2003 was an absolute kind of game changer, I think, for the region. And you have to remember, we're obviously in a crisis moment then, now, but at that time, she was launching that biennial during a war, and an exceptionally sort of testing time, but being very resilient and really inviting artists from all over the world, which made a massive impact on everything going on. I was part of in the right place at the right time, and lucky enough to join the team at Bidoon, which was founded by Lisa Farjam, along with Negar Azimi, and Sunny Rahba, who runs the Third Line now, was part of that group as well. So I guess a kind of movement of thinking about how to sort of do things in a homegrown way from the ground up, and to sort of look at this very interesting moment of kind of deepening internationalism in the UAE and across the region. I was also joined Dubai Film Festival in its first year in 2004 as an Arab programmer, which was really exceptional. I mean, working with some incredible other programmers who knew Arab film inside out. I had an amazing learning curve working with Mr. Jamal and Efran Rashid and colleagues. And then, you know, as Lynn mentioned, and also Hala, you know, by the mid-2000s, things started to really, really change. Art Dubai set up in the same year as Christie's in 2006. And, you know, I think there was this kind of, you know, as everyone's pointed out, there was a very, you know, fundamental art scene that had been going on in the UAE for a very long time. The Cultural Foundation in Abu Dhabi was, you know, hugely influential. There were great groups of artists doing their thing, and theatre, particularly theatre in Arabic, was very established. But suddenly the international world started to wake up to the Middle East in general, and began to kind of really see that the UAE could be a kind of hub that draws together these scenes. As Hala said, there were lots of little mini scenes, but no one had really kind of referred to Middle Eastern art as one entity before. I mean, for better or worse, you know, we can maybe come back to that. It was a very interesting moment, and everything kind of bubbled. I joined the fair in 2010, and you know, it's worth remembering that in 2006, Art Dubai was the first international fair in Asia, so first fair outside of the Europe and Americas on that scale. So it very quickly kind of escalated and took advantage of that moment. And then the fair became, you know, the most international in the world, actually, in terms of sort of makeup of galleries and artists, and still going very strong. And in 2016, I had a sort of change of tack and went to Art Jameel, which is a foundation that's dedicated to supporting artists and creative communities. We really try to sort of have a particular focus on recognizing the very multiple, you know, number of multiple histories that exist in the region, and to try and sort of dissect and illuminate and document those histories, while thinking in a very kind of timely and contemporary way about the sort of topics of our time. We work across research and learning and exhibition making. We opened the Jameel Art Centre in Dubai in 2018, our first centre. And the show that we opened with was called Crude, looking at oil through the eyes of contemporary and modern artists. And of course, this facilitated a lot of exchange with the US. And the curator of that exhibition, Murtaza Ghali, I think is the only curator in the world that has on his CV that he's based between Sharjah and Brooklyn. Don't know if anybody else in that field. And, you know, among the many other works, there were lots of artists looking at the Aramco archives, for example, another artist looking at Chicago Beach in Chicago and its namesake in Dubai, and sort of all these links with the US sort of came bubbling up through that exhibition. Another theme we've been looking at over the last couple of years is material heritage. So this sort of cycle of destruction and recreation of our monuments and our kind of material symbols of history. Of course, this is even more of the moment right now. And our current exhibition also riffs on this theme. We have a 2-floor exhibition at the moment, and luckily we were able to open a couple of weeks ago, so we're back on a little bit back on track now. An exhibition by Michael Rakowitz, who's the Chicago-based Iraqi-American artist, known for everything from his you know, explorations of public housing in Chicago right through to working with veterans, American veterans from the Iraq War, to cook his Jewish Iraqi grandmother's recipes and serve them to the public. So, and he came and just managed to open the exhibition with us before we had to shut down in March, and he's had an incredible impact on everything locally. As you mentioned, we work very closely with the Met, and you know, with Clare specifically, actually in Clare's department, and this is part of a kind of international move by Art Jameel to try and ensure that Middle Eastern artists are seen, you know, on the world stage. And obviously working with one of the greatest encyclopedic museums in the world is an absolute treat. And, you know, I'm sure Claire will talk a little bit more about that. And then I guess just to close out, when I was thinking about the sort of nature of this bridge, and to me, in a way, it's about the very global, shared global nature of working in the US and the UAE. You know, through our collaboration with the Met, we reach New Yorkers and Americans, but obviously the world as well, given the nature of New York. And hopefully these days of mass, you know, travel will continue and come back at some point. And meanwhile, we have the digital. And, you know, Art Jameel is building a major cultural hub in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where the Jameel family is from. But when thinking about creating a first international base, it was very obvious that we should be in the UAE. I mean, you know, there's a very urgent conversation to be had, and about the nature of society and belonging and the changes that are happening. And in the UAE, you have a feeling that art really matters. You know, you can have these kind of urgent debates through art, perhaps only through the art scene. It's something that's quite rare. And at the same time, you know, you reach 15 million tourists a year. Well, we wish they all came to our centre. They don't all come, but there are 15 million tourists that come to Dubai every year, and you're able to then address a global public and allow that public to access not only artists from the UAE, but also from the wider region, including South Asia, our close neighbours. I think that,
Thank you so much. Thank you, Antonia. I mean, I think your background of wearing so many different hats these past few years is something all of us can really attest to, since, I mean, my work at Christie's, I mean, it's still an emerging and new market, and I feel we really always have to wear so many hats, whether it's in education, you know, in many ways. I mean, we can talk about this later, and especially this idea of, you know, why UAE as being a hub for the regional scene. It would be, you know, something to kind of discuss soon and shortly on this. And last but not least, Clare. I have known Clare when, you know, I was still a student, as undergrad student, and she was kind enough to meet with me a few times. You know, Clare is at the Metropolitan Museum. If you can just share with us your story, your background of how you got into this. I know there'll be a connection somewhere with NYU with Lynn a bit. So if you can share it with us.
Thank you, Suzy, and thank you to Dana and Haitham and to all my lovely fellow panelists. I guess my small story of how I ended up here is begins in high school when my mother was actually quite involved in helping to fund theater and music programs in Cairo, where we were living. And so I kind of ended, you know, this became a familiar scene to me at the time, and something that I took for granted, and you know, sort of understood that as you know, a normal and very important central part of what it meant to live in Cairo. So after graduating from college, I was working in some art institutions in LA, and then I heard about this festival called the El Nataq Festival in Cairo, and kind of looked around and thought, that sounds much more interesting. So I decided to go back to Cairo, and I ended up working at the Townhouse Gallery, which is where I first heard of, you know, things sort of bubbling in the UAE in 2006 with the auction houses opening and sort of making a big splash at that time. And I think that my time at the Townhouse, which was quite brief, just 2 years, I put together a sound art residency, among other things, but it definitely focused my attention on certain questions that kept repeating, certain discussions that people were having, you know, consistently. And I began to get curious about what the history was of those questions and those conversations. So I applied to New York University, and they, you know, proposing this PhD in art history from the Middle East, modern art history from the Middle East. I'm not sure, you know, I was surprised that they that they welcomed me, but they did, very, very kindly and supportively. And I ended up doing actually all of my coursework on European and American sort of modern post-war art, and then went back to Egypt in 2010, just before everything sort of started happening, to begin my dissertation work. And so I did a lot of research and writing in this quite volatile moment in, you know, history in Egypt and in other places, which was interesting, and sort of, I think, allowed me to see certain, you know, have certain insights that I wouldn't have been able to have otherwise. So after that, I was given a postdoctoral research award in Berlin, the Irmgard Konix Award, focusing on, I proposed a research project focusing on the history of the tricontinental liberation, the Third World Liberation Movement and its relationship to the Arab world. And at that point was considering next steps. And I think what drew me to the Met was certainly the access, the amazing kind of access it gave me to actual works of art, to seeing them in person, to be able to study them in person, and which had been something that was frustrating to, as a graduate student, to work on things and not have immediate access to them. But since joining the Met in 2015, it's been kind of an amazing ride with this, this huge encyclopedic museum, really trying to rethink its approach to modern art in a global context and committing itself to that project, and something that I obviously really believe in, and so been very proud to be a part of. And I've been able to put on 2 shows. One was the first US retrospective of the Iranian American artist Sia Armajani. And the second one was a collaboration with the Ancient Near East Department and the head of the Ancient Near East Department at the Met, Kim Benzel, and the artist Rayan Tebet. That show will be up for quite a while, so please come by. And there's some other things in the works, but the other side of what I do is collecting, and maybe that's something we can touch on a little bit.
Great, thank you, Claire. I think, a key word you mentioned was accessibility and access, and that's something that, especially for these modern artworks, these prized masterpieces that are in private hands, that whatever it is, they're, privately sold through auction or whatnot, and make their way into these exhibitions, how important that is to show and to have access to showcasing such important works that, are narrating a modern art history. That's not just through the Western canon. So that's, something I think we'll definitely be able to touch. I guess let's go to Hala. I know you're probably asked all the time, what are the top 3 most expensive works that broke the auction record, which I know you're probably tired of hearing already. But I would like if you shared a few sold works at Christie's and illustrate, this bridge between the UAE and the US in the work that you do.
Thank you, Suzy, for sparing me to list the 3 works, which I will actually happily do so on my Instagram after the call, I promise, for everybody to watch and to have forever on my feed. 3 works come to mind because I thought about them, and one I'm very happy about. Now it's so sad that we couldn't bring it all the way to the UAE back then to put it in one of our Middle Eastern sales. It's a beautiful Saliba Dwayhi that was in the American Super Collection of Peggy and David Rockefeller, which was sold as part of the bigger collection in New York. This much talked about collection topped $835 million at the time. And this particular Saliba Dwayhi, which is a beautiful abstract work with lots of hues of light purples and grays and blues, is now in the beautiful collection of Bergil in New York as we speak, not behind the virtual gallery behind Lynn. So the story of, how Saliba Dwayhi, an artist from the mountain of Lebanon, immigrated to the USA in the early 50s and spent a good amount of time, basically until much later, painted so many important churches and monuments there. I visited recently, actually, just before the lockdown, Our Lady of Lebanon Maronite Cathedral in Brooklyn. And I hope when things open up, people can go and discover these beautiful stained glass windows by Dwayhi. So this work is from the early 60s actually. And Dwayhi, when he went to the USA, he was very much influenced by people like Mark Rothko, by Hans Hofmann, by Ed Reinhardt, and you can see his abstraction very much, like the East and West in his approach to art. And this work is a very nice story to illustrate this bridge. A second one, I think I will ask for Claire later on to talk more about, because it ended up on the walls of the Metropolitan. I am not revealing any secrets here. It's public information. It's the beautiful Gazar from the 50s, which is Year of Mud, Year of Paste, which we were very also lucky to have sold in our London premises in 2018. And I'll let you, Claire, talk about why you guys decided to acquire this beautiful masterpiece. Again, you know, there's a nice story there. And a very nice one would be actually an Iraqi artwork by Jawad Salim, because this is like an early tie with the Middle East. It was actually done when Jawad Salim, actually it was a gift from Jawad Salim to the United States of America as part of his invitation, the invitation that Ahmadis, back then in the early 50s, they came to Syria, they came to Iraq, they established machinery, you know, to promote the American culture in the same way that the British Council later on came to these countries, Cervantes from Spain, Goethe Institute from Germany. So it was a major, major contribution to the art scene back then, because they invited so many artists from the region, out of which is Jawad Salim. And this beautiful work of the watermelon seller came to us from Washington, DC, and then it was obviously sold to privately. But this work back then in the 50s went in a touring exhibition to 3 states in the USA as part of the Jawad Salim touring exhibition, which I think also is a fascinating story about these bridges. I have a few more, but you asked for 3, so I'll stop here.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to highlight, Hala, with the traveling exhibitions, especially in the US. And maybe Lynn, you can comment, you know, I'm sure with how many years with the Gray Art Gallery that they've been having these shows, you know, early on. It's not just, let's say, the past 10 to 15 years that, you know, you've been highlighting these exhibitions, but I would maybe thought would be interesting of how the interactions with the public has been, especially, you know, whatever it is in looking at stereotypes in the Middle East. I mean, I'm from the States, I understand. How has that been for you in, you know, how these exhibition openings have been in the public programming?
That's an interesting question. I would say it's been remarkably positive. We did our very first show, and I'd also like to, you know, I echo Claire's observation that, you know, having access to works of art is the most marvelous part about the job. I mean, you know, that I can go see the works and to learn from the works. And so I was first introduced to Abby Gray's collection, as I said, in 1997, and we did our first show in 2002, which was Between Word and Image, which looked at the Iranian holdings that Abby had collected starting in 1960. And that was, you know, again, a tumultuous history a year after 2001. But it was received very positively, and it triggered all sorts of discussions. And then in 2005, we hosted a show from the Arab Image Foundation that had been organized by Walid Rad and Akram Sarahi. And that was a fabulous experience. Again, I read about the Arab Image Foundation in the New York Times and contacted Walid. He was the representative here in the States. And to get to know his and Zakrim's work was, you know, really wonderful and an interesting introduction. And, you know, it's been growing since. We've had an amazing response, both critically and from the public, to taking shape, which has been very gratifying. And I think what stands out for me is, I think, and I'm sure my colleagues on this panel can attest to that, thank goodness there's a much more open attitude towards looking at art from around the world and not just from the North American, Western European axis, which had dominated for so long in terms of certainly modernist art history and modernist discourses. And so to have the reaction that I received a lot was, wow, it's so fantastic to see art by artists I'm not aware of, and to see such fantastic work by artists I'm not aware of. And for me, it's a continuous learning curve. The modernists from Sudan were eye-opening for me, and very exciting. So it's, I'd say, generally very positive.
That's great. That's great to hear. You know, and this idea of even changing perceptions, obviously looking at the US, but even within the UAE, maybe Antonia, you can share, you know, how your exhibitions you've been putting up have been changing perspectives even locally. I mean, for me, you know, looking at Michael Rakowitz's show, seeing what he's been doing in the US to kind of talk about that, you know, can you comment on that of, you know, how your exhibitions you've been working on have changed perceptions from within, you know, the UAE, but also how it's been reflected to the US?
Well, I think what's, you know, one of the most fascinating things about working in the UAE is that you can have conversations that can seem incredibly kind of to do with microgeographies or a very, you know, kind of localized situation, but they touch very much internationally. I mean, just to think about how, you know, this spark of us looking at material histories began a couple of years ago, and part of that was thinking, we tend to think through research topics in a very long-term way, working with through our library. And we invited Rand Abdul-Jabbar, who is an artist based in Abu Dhabi, to come and present her research that she'd been doing on a minaret in Ana in Iraq, and to sort of trace the history of that minaret. And part of that exhibition was a debate that it wasn't supposed to be a debate, but it erupted into a really fantastic debate in our library, where she gave a talk with one of the archaeologists that had rebuilt this minaret, which has a very, very checkered history. It's now being rebuilt for the third time due to various sweeps of history. And this, you know, and we had all ages from small kids to grandparents in the room, people crushed into this library. And the conversation began about, you know, whether Iraq's history should be in Iraq, or whether the great, you know, museums of the world that have holdings from Iraq should be entrusted with this history. And, you know, it's obviously restitution and a debate that over the last couple of years has bubbled up, you know, in the art world to almost a kind of roar right now, if we think of the media, what's happening. And, but this was a conversation where people very close to, you know, the material history they were discussing, people who'd rebuilt it, you know, with their hands themselves. They weren't part of kind of, you know, the art debates that take place in kind of international art English. You know, they were discussing in Arabic their kind of incredibly emotional ties to this history. And it erupted into the most fantastic debate where we had people, you know, storming out of the room and disagreeing with each other. Just, you know, it was a fantastic discussion. And it really kind of, I guess, is an example of how something can be absolutely materially significant to somebody in a very emotional, very day-to-day way, but also impacted on kind of global debates. And then in terms of the ways that, I mean, I echo what other people are saying about the way that the conversation has changed quite radically in the UAE to really feel incredibly connected, not only with the US, but other places too, but also the ways in which debates that come up through the US, the art scene in the US can have, you know, have a sort of rollout effect to the rest of the world. So we're incredibly kind of connected in that way. Just with Michael's show at the moment, we've just begun a debate series. So the Iraqi club of the American University of Sharjah came to us and said they visited the exhibition and they were seeing their history in a certain way that they'd never seen before and never experienced before through Michael's eyes. And we've now set up this kind of debate. I mean, the Royal We, this is head of exhibitions, Noura Razian, working with Mariam Al-Dabakh, put together this kind of debate. So we're meeting with Iraqi students and debating Michael's work with them. And when we told Michael about this, he said, you know, this is an absolute dream come true for him. And, you know, to have those kind of conversations with students on the ground of all, none of them are art students, they're from all different backgrounds, but they really into debating their history and heritage. So I think that's something that's incredibly positive to see.
Thank you so much, Antonia. There's an interesting question I'm going to ask from the audience afterwards. I thought it was an interesting question, but I just wanted to ask Clare, you know, if you can maybe share a top artwork acquired and why, if you can share that with us.
Sure. Well, I want to mention two really wonderful works that I'm very proud of being able to bring into the collection. And one is by Salwa Rauda Shuer, the Lebanese, the late Lebanese artist. And that was brought in using Art Jameel funds, which made possible this really important acquisition, I think, by a woman working in the 60s, an incredibly interesting sort of modular forms, and in relationship to the Bauhaus and in relationship to Islamic art. And so the work is called Structure with 1,000 Pieces. And I was able to sort of bring it from the artist's apartment and bring it to life again in a way, trying to realize the artist's original intention for the work. So that's something that I have to say that I'm very proud of being able to have done. And the other work is by, as Hala mentioned, Abdelhadi Ghazar, who is, I think one of the most beloved of Egyptian modern artists. This is an especially wonderful piece that had kind of been tucked away for many, many years and nobody had seen it. And so thank you, Hala, for bringing it to light. And it was very exciting to be able to get it up on the museum walls in the permanent galleries. And I've been working with some of the conservators, and we've found, some underdrawings that are fascinating. I feel like I'm way behind in trying to keep up with, just the richness of these acquisitions and trying to communicate that more publicly. But there's a lot that's been going on, but these are two really that are close to my heart.
A big shout out to the whole team and to Valerie Didier as well for this work.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think to be able to be in the Met and to see this work alongside others was definitely for me a personal milestone moment to be there. I wanted to ask a question, Antonia. This was directed to you, which was an interesting one. Crisis opens up opportunity. Why do you think that is? Is an intentional marketing strategy there? Is it a top-down initiative, or does it come from grassroots?
Question. Yeah, I mean, we should never, gloss over the fact that this is a very deep crisis globally, not only, obviously impacting health, but also the economies all over the world. And this is going to be an incredibly testing time. In the UAE, we're, relatively lucky in that there was a very kind of quick and assertive reaction to what was happening. And we've been very lucky, touching wood now, that we haven't suffered as much as other countries. So, but at the same time, yes, there is, I think a crisis like this and focuses the mind in a certain way. And obviously there've been a lot of memes on social media saying, imagine lockdown with no art, no movies, no books, and see how long everyone will be able to stay home. This is the time to really appreciate the arts. And that could seem kind of glib, but it actually has a really, significant and, it's actually true in many ways. We at moments like this, the value of culture to our lives and the ways in which culture brings people together become very sharply kind of defined. So I think, yes, there are a certain number of opportunities. We've seen in the UAE, for example, that quite a number of groups have sprung up. One run by Bill Braggin at NYU Art Center and Maya Allison at the Art Gallery, for example, has brought together everybody working in the industry together to sort of discuss ways in which they can help each other, in which we can collaborate. And that's been incredibly positive. And, everyone says, why didn't we do this before? Why did it take a crisis for us all to get together, on Zoom and discuss these common kind of challenges? So there is a lot of grassroots activity going on at the moment in which people are coming together and thinking how they can kind of help each other. And at the same time in the UAE, we've had a concerted move by government as well. So Dubai Culture, for example, came in and supported the research and practice platform that Art Jameel put together to distribute micro grants to artists all over the Middle East and in the UAE. And the Ministry of Culture and Knowledge Development has also put together a fund to help artists at this time too. So I think there's also maybe a recognition at the top-down level as well that culture is a fundamental building block of society. It's not something there to prettify or, you know, something that we can do without. It's actually something that's absolutely fundamental to our lives and to building community and really kind of trying to think about how to future-proof society as well. So that's, you know, there are small silver linings to all the clouds that we need to sort of focus on, and also to keep building, you know, from the ground up. I mean, we've kind of saluted a lot of the really amazing things that have taken place in the UAE, and, you know, we do now have quite a mature scene in a way. If you think of museums like the Louvre Abu Dhabi all the way through to Tashkil, and the artists kind of community, but there are still massive gaps, you know, in education, in critique, you know, arts writing in Arabic is an absolutely, you know, massive area that needs huge support. So we're, you know, continually driving forward and trying to get people galvanized to help the scene as much as they can.
I think that's an interesting, obviously, you know, education is a next, you know, topic to really discuss. I mean, in each way, as discussed, you know, everyone has to wear different hats, whether they're getting their doctorate or their, you know, master's, or they're writing a monograph on an artist. I mean, all of it is so integral into really solidifying and building the momentum of this art scene. If maybe someone on the panel wants to kind of discuss how important education is in terms of the regional art scene, how your role is so different than any other role as, you know, an auction specialist in London, or as, you know, a curator at a museum in a different category. You know, if someone could maybe comment on how integral education is.
Can I start?
Yes.
Well, as a university museum, you know, education is at the core. And again, one of, you know, the great delights has been, and I'm talking about education in general, but also in our role, since we're not located in the region, but in New York, is the access students get to seeing these works and learning from them. So we have a very active intern program. And if you go to our website, you can see a virtual tour that a graduate student did about the Bardil art collection. And we've had some graduate assistants go on to then learn Arabic and start to do more advanced studies. And so that has been very important. And I think, again, going to our founder, Abby Gray, whose motto was, back in 1960, one world through art, communication was essential. And talk about exhibitions circulating. I mean, I think it's so important. She organized the very first exhibitions of modern Turkish art to travel in the US, the first exhibition of Iranian art, and I think the first exhibition also of Indian art, and helped support the Indian Triennial when it first started back in the 60s. So exchanges are really important, and programs. And again, my colleague, I know Maya Allison at NYU, Abu Dhabi at the Art Gallery there has done a lot of programs for kids, which I think is really important in the region, and letting people become familiar with and comfortable going to the museums and the resources that are now available, like the Louvre Abu Dhabi and Jameel and so forth and so on. So all of that is essential.
No, I totally agree. And I mean, I think the rise of higher education in the UAE was absolutely fundamental in the art scene, you know, developing in the way it actually did. I mean, if you think, I mean, Zayed University is obviously absolutely fundamental, but the American universities, just making the link also back to the US, the American University of Sharjah, which I think was founded in 1997. So you saw the first kind of graduates coming through in the early 2000s. And also at that time, it was obviously very difficult for young people from the Gulf and from the Arab world to travel to study in the States. You know, in the post 9/11 era, it was very difficult for people to get visas to go pretty much anywhere. I don't know whether that's really changed. Maybe it's even got worse. I don't know, but it's kind of, you know, it's suddenly very difficult for people to travel. So people were looking for educational opportunities at home. And when AUS was set up, and then AUD, and the expansion of Zayed University also meant that suddenly women could go en masse to university in a way that they never could before. So I think that kind of gender kind of massive change in tertiary education also then paved the way for the art scene to develop in the way it did, because suddenly you had so many young people graduating, and also in subject, still no art school, but in the AUS Architecture and Design Department, I think is probably the most influential, feeder into the art scene than any other. So lots of, for kids, it's much easier to persuade your parents that you want to be an architect or an engineer than it is to be an artist. So a lot of, people were able to get on those courses, study architecture, graduate, and then go into the arts. So I think, that kind of expansion of higher education and the kind of collaboration with the American system was something that was highly influential on the development of the UAE art scene itself.
Definitely. I think
I would like to just add a note on this higher education thing, that with the works of people like Salwa Mukhdadi and Dr. Nada Shabbout in the USA, I think the ultimate goal eventually would be to have a proper curriculum of art history that covers the region, because it's still not there. It's just up to some amazing professors who are, focusing time and energy. I salute Sultan, who's a great motivator for all of us. And he's been giving his own courses in many of the universities he's working with. But I think that's the main thing. With us, I mean, we are an auction house at the end of the day, but under Christie's education, we managed to bring in many courses. We built our own Middle Eastern curriculum, which I was like the one behind it with the team, and we gave it to many private institutions in the region. And it's a curriculum that I'm developing on my own with the help of people like Suzy and some other colleagues. And hopefully one day it will land in one of those big universities. So there's a lot of work to be done, which is very exciting. And when it comes to visas, I think, Antonia, now with COVID, we're all going to learn online. So no more, it's not a big problem anymore.
Yeah.
I wanted to, unfortunately it's ending soon. I wanted to ask if there's any additional questions, please send them to us. I know I just saw a comment from an artist, mentioning this is an opportunity to make meaningful connections instead of feeling isolated, which I can completely agree. I think this time, as I mentioned, is something that we're allowed to feel closer together. Definitely. I want to ask as well, if each one can just go around as a closing of really why you do what you do. I know that, your title is one thing, but why are you doing what you're doing in the art world today? And as advice to give to people that are wanting to work in the art scene or that are interested in the Middle Eastern art scene. So really, why do you do what you do?
Well, I guess I'll start. I think I've said this before, but I think it's true. I think that many of the questions that I find most interesting are being raised by artists working in the Middle East, or sort of grappling with the kind of the canon and how to digest, think about that, etc. I think, what Antonia mentioned, promoting arts writing in Arabic and other languages other than English is essential, and it's very meaningful. I think looking at all the panelists today, it's very clear how there's a lot of interrelated concerns and questions. But I think for me, the most interesting and challenging questions are coming out of the Middle East at the moment, and that's what I do.
I'll chime in afterwards. Artists, are essential to society, and they can speak truth to power. They can bring up things that are challenging. They can bring up things that they can provide solace in times of distress. And I think that to be a platform to be able to support artists and to preserve and conserve their work, to make sure that it's available for students, others to see it and to learn, is why I do what I do. And, it's paid off. Not only am I always learning and a continual student, but so learning from both the artworks and the students, but there is a dialogue that emerges that I think enriches everyone's life.
I wanted to just ask, since I know we're closing, and I'll take one final question that I noticed. Gia Haddad had asked, she was mentioning the earlier art scene in the UAE versus the newer one with the onset of international recognition. and she basically says, do these two complement each other, the earlier scene and the newer scene, or does one exist at the expense of another?
I think, yeah, I think they do complement each other. I mean, there was a certain, you know, and maybe we're feeling this at the moment because we're in this particular moment, this kind of slowing down and thinking about things a little bit deeper. There was a kind of moment in the 2000s when perhaps the art scene in the UAE felt like it was running away with itself a little bit. It was so on steroids. But at that point, it did feel that there hadn't been enough kind of connection back to, I mean, particularly just thinking through writings and debates that take place in Arabic. You know, the Cultural Foundation closed at that point. It had been something that was very fundamental to community building and to that kind of debate. So I think there maybe was a moment where it felt like these two worlds were sort of diverging from each other. But in recent years, you've seen that really coming back together. I mean, the very, you know, late recognition of Hassan Sharif's work, you know, Hala mentioned Hassan earlier. That was a kind of connection with the past and his group of five and all the work that he did, you know, as a critic as well as an artist. And there are others that carry on those kind of teachings, like Muhammad Kazim, for example. So, you know, I think those connections are becoming deeper, and hopefully this moment gives us a, you know, time to even slow down even more and kind of think about those kinds of histories and document them. There was a time when, you know, history was moving so fast, we felt that 5 years ago was kind of some kind of ancient time. So now it's really a chance to sort of slow down and think and document.
And I think also in what Suzy is doing with the UAE, with the UAE embassy in Washington, because I kind of understood from her that our panel is the last of a series of talks that she's been recording with artists from the region and artists from the West, with artists that are starting their career and very much established artists who were represented by, you know, Art Dubai at the time and like big institution. So I think once these panels are live and we can see them, Suzy, you could share them with Khayat, and I hope this will continue because there is a need.
Definitely. I think, you know, dialogue and the conversations are necessary. And as mentioned, I mean, this is part of a digital programming I'm working on that's going to be unveiled these next few weeks. I've been having many private recorded interviews with American artists and Emirati artists. And what I think is great is just finding the parallels in so many of their works that you would have never imagined, which is really exciting. So please stay tuned. I wanted to thank everyone who was part of this, the panelists, the audience for watching this. And please make sure to follow, of course, the UAE Embassy's Cultural Diplomacy Department, their Instagram at UAE Culture USA, as well as my personal one at Mideast Arts. Thank you so much. I hope that we had some chances to talk about the earlier years, especially what each one of you are doing and how interconnected this ecosystem really is through all these stories we've been sharing. So I really appreciate it. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Claire.
Bye.